Hello and welcome everyone to another Sales Hacker webinar. My name is Scott Barker, Head of Partnerships at Sales Hacker, Evangelist at Outreach.io, and I'm lucky enough to be your host and moderator for the next hour or so. And I've been excited for this one for a while. The pre-webinar call was fire. We should have just recorded that one. But what we're going to be talking about is account-based sales. So much confusion around this topic, but it seems to always be in the limelight. We had ABM, now we have ABS, and it never goes away. And it seems like a lot of people haven't quite cracked the code. So the approach we're going to take today is really getting tactical with it. Like, what does this actually look like in the real world? You know, everyone wants to say that they're account-based this, account-based that, but how do you actually build it into your strategy? So we're going to go through plays and tactics, specifically we may add a bonus one if we have time, but what we're talking about is 4 account-based sales plays to close more deals in 2020. I got the right people to be having this discussion. And before I introduce my lovely guests, quickly housekeeping. Number one, if you've ever been on a Sales Hacker webinar, we do these for you. These are very much for the community, and we want to hear from you, your name, your title, where you're from, and any burning questions around ABS. Please jump on the bottom there. There's a Q&A section. Feel free to introduce yourself because we want you to really drive this conversation. We've got some notes and things we want to cover, but hopefully you'll help us kind of drive. And then number 2 is this is recorded, and you will get a copy of the recording within 24 hours. I promise. I always get emails asking for it. It's coming, I promise. All right, we got that out of the way. I want to introduce my amazing guests. I am joined by Ali McKee, the CEO and founder of Stick. Ali, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Excited to have you. And also joined by Dan Gottlieb, who is an analyst for Topo, recently acquired by Gartner. So congratulations, my man. And specifically an analyst for account-based and sales development for growth organizations. So Dan, welcome, man. We're excited to have you because you have such a narrow kind of line of focus on these topics that we're talking about.
Absolutely. Yeah, glad to be here. And as you did point out, I am indeed a big geek about this stuff. Yeah. So glad to be here and talking about this very relevant and important topic in our weird niche world that we all live in.
Yeah,
it's true.
Absolutely. And you'll find by the end of this webinar, we might look somewhat cool. Ali's got her blazer, we got our AirPods in, but like Dan said, we're total geeks about this stuff, and you'll learn that as you go. But okay, before we dive into it, I do like to provide just like a little more color. We've got the titles, but Ali, where did you come from? How did you create Stick? What's kind of your background?
Yeah, absolutely. So my background is coming from a combination of studio art and business. And have found my niche in this B2B sales world because I'm trying to solve the presentation problem. Have found that the importance of content obviously is going up and up as attention goes down and down. And so really working on like, how do you leverage visuals, storytelling, and real-time feedback to create better content experiences for buyers. And so I'm having a ton of fun, working with lots of different companies in the Sales Hacker community and beyond on, rethinking how they're engaging their buyers with storytelling. Yeah,
I love it. And it's such, you're focused on a problem that needs to be solved desperately. Oh. Every time I sit through a demo and a presentation and you've got the 8-slide presentation that you have to go through and everyone secretly wants to blow their brains out, it's broken, right? And like, it's so funny when you ask like the buyers of like, okay, do you like sitting through these presentations, these PowerPoints. And they'll all say no. And then you'll be like, well, what does your sales team do? And they'll be like, oh, well, they do that. So there's this just interesting disalignment. So it's exciting to watch you solve that problem. And Dan,
trying to save all of our brain cells from boring meetings. That's what we're going for here.
That should be the new tagline.
Exactly.
Saving brain cells from boredom.
Done.
And Dan, what about you, man? How did you end up at Topo?
Well, I mean, I've spent the last 2 and change years at Topo, right, doing research on what very fast-growing companies do. That's what makes Topo different as an analyst firm, is we very much so focus on fast-growing companies and trying to capture in research exactly what is the pattern, the plays, the benchmarks, and then bringing those ideas into our clients. And before doing that, I was a self-employed consultant trying to tackle the exact same issue for top of funnel and sales teams. So very much so specializing in when we're ready to have a conversation with a client, what does that look like? What are the different ways we set up conversations with prospects and clients? And then how do we move them through a sales process in a way that makes us feel good? Before doing that, I had this exact kind of role in various different fast-growing companies for the earlier part of my career. So I carried a bag myself for 6 years, ran a region, and so I have a lot of deep empathy for this challenge. And I think for me, you know, I consider myself somebody who's really just interested in being a storyteller and trying to capture. I don't consider myself an expert by any means. I just consider myself a total student of the game. And my responsibilities here are to try and make sure that all of these very accessible and important ways of thinking about working are available to a much larger audience. And that's, I think, what motivates me. And that's how I got to Topo. And that's why I do what I do. And that's why I'm here now.
I love it. I love it. And you've got a brilliant mind for this stuff. Like you said, you've just been immersed in it for years. So whether you claim not to be an expert and you're still a student of the game, but I think you've been immersed so much that some may call you an expert. And if you're lucky enough to ever choose your seat at a conference and Dan is there, make sure that you sit beside Dan, because you will be absolutely fascinated by this guy's notes. They're the most beautiful notes I've ever seen in my life. And I was lucky at Outreach's Summit Series. I just happened to stand beside Dan and was absolutely mind blown. Look at these. They're beautiful.
You haven't seen my notes are a joke. You haven't seen Allie's. You have to see Allie's notes. You haven't seen mine. But yeah. All right. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Of course. All right. Let's dive into it. Let's talk about account-based selling. I think before we get into kind of some of the plays, I think it's really important that we set the stage so that everyone is on the same page with what we're actually talking about today. Because again, going back to what I said earlier, there seems to be a lot of confusion of what this actually is. So, Allie, I'll start with you, and then we'll get the nice kind of zipped up Topo definition. But Allie, let's start with you. What is account-based selling to you?
Yeah. So account-based selling to me is kind of to continue the thing I acknowledged earlier, right? Which is like attention is at an all-time low. Competition is at an all-time high. And so the only way that you're going to actually get through into an account is to not only customize your content, your value proposition, but to really like lead with value. And so I think about it as, how do you kind of tell the same story with different characters? And account-based selling is understanding who are the characters, right?
Yeah.
And I mean that in, it's a lot of discovery and a lot of, understanding all the different players. But that's how I think about it from my sales storytelling lens.
Yeah, I like that. So telling the same story with different characters, both internally and externally. Like you need the internal characters telling that same story as well, and then telling that same story to the characters that you deem to be the most important or worthy of hearing your story.
Exactly. And I mean, the thing I would add to that too is, you know, the statistic we cite all the time is there used to be 3.8 buyers in a deal, then it jumped to 5.6. And then in the course of, you know, a year, it actually is up to 10.2 on average.
Yeah.
So that's why, you know, this, you know, ABS is so important, because if you don't have a strategy to not only get into that one buyer, one champion, your deal is going to die. So I think that it's more important than it ever has been before.
Yeah, totally. Gone are the days of like marketing throwing you a lead, you working set lead until set lead becomes an opportunity, and then you just have this one point of entry, point of contact, and then hope and pray that that turns into a closed one deal, which we'll get to in a little bit, which may still be the right move for you, depending on the size, what industry you're in. Like I'm not saying account-based selling is right for everyone, but we're seeing a pretty big pushback against that. Dan, your thoughts here. What is account-based selling? What's the definition that your kind of research team has come up with?
Well, I think account-based selling is this consequence of this larger strategic decision by a business to move in this direction of account-based everything in general, right? And so if we start there, when we think about account-based everything, we think about that as it's really this coordinated and strategic effort to say, look, we have enough data to understand that of our entire market, we know that a smaller percentage of it is going to be better for us to invest more marketing and sales, customer success resources into working. And so what that turns out to look like is this effort to coordinate all of our efforts across sales development, across sales, across marketing, and even customer success to engage with a specific set of target accounts. And so this shift is really important to understand, because what it means for sellers is that they're moving from a world where they're handed a higher volume of opportunities to a world where they have a defined universe of accounts. This is particularly disruptive for sales reps in B2B SaaS companies that aren't used to this. But if you were to actually go out and talk to reps in medical sales, in pharmaceutical manufacturing sales, they would tell you that this is something how they've been operating already. And so account-based sales is the way of thinking about how to go after a set list of target accounts where velocity is no longer as high of a priority as engagement and penetration within a set list of accounts. And so it changes our mindset around how we think about the front of the sales process. It changes our mindset around how much effort and creativity and resources we put into earlier stage sales conversations. And there's a lot more to that we're going to talk about here, but it's the broader overarching way of thinking about it is a sales rep's set of tactics and plays that they need to engage a set and finite list of target accounts.
Yeah. Agree with everything you said there. And I think part of it too is just organizations are finally waking up to this idea that an overwhelming majority of their ARR is coming from certain accounts that look a certain way. So why don't we go and proactively, service that market, get in front of them? And you mentioned something on our pre-webinar call, which is a really helpful way to reframe your brain if you're a seller, you're carrying a bag, or you're a leader, to pass this on to your team. And you have to get away from this mentality of disqualifying in and out. That's like almost not even your job anymore, because the broader organization has said, no, like based on all our data, we've talked with finance, we've talked with customer success, we've talked with our sales team, we've talked to BD, we've talked to everyone. Based on all the data that we have as an organization, these are the accounts we should break into. We're most profitable, yada, yada, it goes on. So it's not your job to qualify in, qualify out anymore. And so many people will say like, that's number one. And you can still qualify in and out certain business units or certain titles. But now your reframe has to be, what is my next best action? This is the world I live in. I have to break into this somehow. What is my next best action to do so? And I thought that was brilliant on your part to kind of put together that reframe.
Yeah, what it does is it forces you to completely rethink how you celebrate success early in a sales cycle and how hard you have to work to create interest, to create intrigue, to build value within an account, and what that looks like incrementally based on how far you get. It's probably the hardest version of sales in that it's also one of the original versions of sales, because we're returning back to these baseline fundamentals of what's required in order to build a great relationship at an account. And it makes sense that we're swinging that way now, right? The biggest difference is that historically, sales reps would have to rely on some degree of intuition, regional proximity in order to work their way into some of these accounts. And so that would end up in hanging out at, like, playing golf to try and make sure you could meet people, these steak dinners, tickets at events, like these old school ways of thinking about building relationships. But now there's so much data that we can actually say, well, we still want to build relationships with target accounts, but we can do it intellectually, right? Because we have data that says this is why we're going to be able to do it. And that is a new way of thinking about how to go after accounts. So I'm really excited to get into the details of this stuff.
Data has replaced the steak, right?
Yeah.
Because if I'm a buyer,
you need to start making sure.
I don't know,
Allie. Data replaced the steak. I love that.
I'm a vegetarian,
You're right.
though, to be fair. So
Data replaced the quinoa.
Totally.
I love it. It's like the steak was like the personalized thing. It's like, oh, everyone likes steak, everyone likes golf. Let's personalize it to this person. And then I see now we're able to be like business relevant. It's like, okay, a steak is a steak, but if I can help you meet your business goals, I'm going to get you a promotion and you're going to have way more money to go on vacation, then, that's a lot better than and buy steaks. Exactly.
Right.
All right.
Right.
So, Allie, why do you think all of a sudden we're having this resurgence? Like, isn't it, like Dan said, isn't this what we've always been doing?
I think it comes down to attention. I mean, my role is a little bit split, right? As a founder of a B2B SaaS startup, I am both a seller and a buyer. And my inbox is a dumpster fire every morning, right? Like, I mean, it's not even what's going through my head as a buyer is it's not, oh, let me see if this is relevant to me, right? It's, does this fit into the priorities that are already in my head? Because I don't need things on my to-do list, right? And that's just getting worse and worse. And so I think the reason why, ABS is having this resurgence is the only people I want to pay attention to as a buyer are the people who are actually helping me build a better business. And I view the reason why I engage with sales reps instead of just buying on the website, right, is sales reps are incredible experts. They're incredible sales, they're experts in their area of expertise because they're talking to companies like me all day long. And I think that ABS is all about how do we, this is, to Dan's point, like this business relevant data is quite valuable. Now let's offer that to our buyers and lead with that value and insight from the beginning. And that's the way to get attention in today's environment.
Yeah, I totally agree, and can commiserate with the oversaturation of, automation and just too much. So when you do see that thoughtful, relevant email that hits a pain point, it's like, wow, thank you. That's amazing. Dan, any further thoughts on this one?
I mean, it's the combination of the strategic decisions that we already made. So there's sort of that internal pressure to make more out of this existing territory is number one. And then the second one that Allie just mentioned is, that the expectations of how to get in touch with B2B, people that run businesses, that make decisions, that run large organizations and teams, they need big ideas. They need help understanding how to tell what's going on out there. And they need sales reps to help them be market experts, to be change experts, to be change agents, to help them understand, right? How is this, not just what are the benefits of this tool, but what's the benefit, what is the experience that I'm going to get out of this, right? And the experience of how that they work together to dream up whatever it is the future is going to look like with their new product in mind is the expectation, right? You go talk to buyers, I mean, in your business or anyone listening that is a buyer, right? You think about why you made decisions sometimes, and you do realize it comes down to how you were sold, what the deal was. This is just back to the fundamentals there. And B2B buyers and execs are expecting a great experience, because that is it's one of the only things that's left to differentiate anymore, right?
Yeah.
And so that plus the internal pressure is creating this very, very challenging role for sales reps to fill in account-based sales. But it's also this exciting opportunity if you feel like these kinds of engagements are something that you can excel in, which we're about to jump into, I imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and before we kind of go in, I just want to preface what we're going to talk about. So we're operating under the assumption that most people who have joined this webinar have some sort of ABS strategy in place, whether it's broken or it's just starting. So we won't be talking about really how to get one going or setting one up or defining your target accounts. That would be a different webinar. Today is about tactical plays. So Dan, do you want to kick us off and just break down how we're going to be approaching this topic today, so we're not just throwing, spaghetti at a wall?
Totally. Yeah. So when we think about an account-based sales process, right, we have to, whenever we talk about selling in general at Topo, we tend to keep it simple. And we think that sales is really a bunch of meetings. Sales is a bunch of meetings, and a lot of a sales process is just moving the right people around, making sure that you're spending your time in the right meetings at the right time with the right people. So if you think about it as a process and you think about it as in terms of meetings, then this idea of how to break down plays can fall into 4 categories. So category number 1 is the highly relevant first meeting, right? We talk about this at Topo also as a high value offer. It is about having a first meeting that is focused on something that is not just a demo. We'll talk about details of what that looks like, but it is a valuable conversation designed to elicit purposeful conversation about an intellectual topic or a problem that person cares about. But we're going about it in a way that isn't just, hey, do you want to see a demo of my software? So that's the first. Now, the second is post-discovery. It's really funny because whenever you talk to VPs of sales at companies towards the end of the quarter, this idea of what I'm about to share with you post-discovery is pretty much how when you have a narrow margin of error in order to hit your target for the quarter. It tends to be how you think anyways. You think, what is necessary to get to the next step? And it's essentially operationalizing that whole idea, but way earlier in the sales process. So post-discovery is about leveraging the insight that you've got in that sort of initial conversation, and then being able to take that, especially at big accounts, and leverage it to either go build more meetings with similar people or go meet new people. We'll talk about that in more detail. This third one, which is a little bit more of an operating principle than it is just a sales play, and this is something that I'm really excited to talk with Ali about too, and it's about custom content. It's about personalizing every single interaction and the summary of the effort that goes into that and how that pays off throughout each individual meeting, both getting the right meeting, getting the right people to the meeting, what happens in the meeting, and then how you set up the expectations for what's going to happen in the next meeting. So being really specific and custom content is just a visual aid to the story that you need to tell. There's a lot of different ways we can talk about that. it's something that feels like a yeah, duh to anybody that's listening. Like, of course, I got to customize my content to the prospects, but it's actually really hard. It's time consuming. It takes a lot of thought, and it's hard to do. And then the fourth one is close plays. And so close plays are it's basically the top of mind things that you do late in a sales cycle to support your prospects to get a deal across the finish line. There are several ways to do it. You want to avoid, the point of this is to avoid the humiliating practice of just reaching out and saying, just checking up on the paperwork, right? Those are the four categories that we tend to think about, account-based sales plays. And when it doesn't perfectly fit left to right, it's really important to know that it doesn't perfectly fit left to right. It requires a sales rep to fully be able to synthesize all the information that they have to make a good decision about what's next, right? And that's what a lot of great selling already is. It's just about capturing that and repeating it. Yeah,
absolutely. I think that's a great way to break it down. I'm excited to dive into each one. But yeah, I just want to reiterate one of your points there is this isn't ever, or most of the time, it won't be a perfect sales funnel where you do your highly relevant first meeting, you do your post discovery, you make some custom content, and then you run your close plays, and bam, we're good to go. You could be down at the close plays running some of these tactics that we're going to talk about, and then, oh no, the next best action now is actually going to have a highly relevant first meeting with someone else and bringing them into the fold, and then you're kind of back at square one, and you're going through it again. But let's start with number one. We'll talk through it in chronological order, even though there's nuances that we'll talk about. Ali, for highly relevant first meeting, so making it super high value without just saying, hey, let's show a demo of your software, what are some things that you've done in Stick or seen done well that have captured your attention and made that highly relevant?
Mm-hmm. Data, right? Bringing the data instead of the steak to continue the thread. I mean, I think the problem that we're solving with Stick is really around kind of the customization of content piece. And so the way that I view it as a seller is like that first meeting is less about, let me show you the features of my product. And it's more, let me understand where you are today, how you use content in your sales process, what are the broader, problems you're trying to solve, and let me see if I can share some ideas that I've seen from companies I've worked with, right? Like I view it almost as I like to think of it more as like a consulting engagement more than a, sales, more than a, one and done. And I think I probably am on a far end of the spectrum there, because given where we are, we're so early stage, and I literally view customers as part of my team because we're building software from that feedback. But I do absolutely take like a collaborative approach of how can I help you solve your problems based on the stuff that I do every day, which is in my case, sales content.
Yeah. I love that. It's kind of insane that that's not more table stakes today, is this idea that if you're an organization, even if you're a new organization, you have unique data on your customer set. You can make it all anonymous, but you can go and like everyone wants to know what their competitors are doing. Everyone wants to know where they stand in the pecking order. Everyone wants to know that, and you have this data. So that in itself is so valuable to you to offer up. I remember when I, carried a bag, and I still have a big number that I have to hit today. And anytime I'm selling anything, I try and whatever the price tag is, I want them to be comfortable with giving that to me for my consulting services. So just by talking to me and understanding, because I'm in a unique place to understand things about the sales tech world and yada, yada, I want them to be comfortable with just our relationship paying whatever that ticket price is. And the added bonus is oh, you also get to use this piece of software, you get to sponsor this, you get to sponsor that. And that's, I think, the new modern seller has to switch, that we've said consultative selling for years, but it's not just a sales approach. There's no really faking it. Like, you have to have an opinion and be backed up by data. And Dan, I'm super interested to get your take on this, because it's basically the Topo business model that you guys have done, and people pay you a pretty healthy chunk of change to leverage some of this data that you have. And I would love to just hear, like, could you walk through how an organization that isn't a research advisory firm could leverage some of the tactics in Topo's business model in their organization?
Yes, it's a great question. I hope my VP of sales isn't upset with me for sharing some of our secret sauce. No, I'm just kidding. We want to share it as wide as we can. So, okay, there's a lot of ways to do this, right? It's about designing this experience of a first meeting and how you message it based off of the experience that you want that person to have, and understanding where they are. So we do a couple of things. One is we do our big industry presentations. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to go on site with one of our sales reps, and I'm going to be walking through 8 mega trends in account-based sales development. And so we're doing this the big story industry presentation as a way of starting a conversation. And, really what we're doing is we're presenting our insight and our point of view and our information, right, to provide value. And what the sales rep does in this scenario is that we train the team to focus on being facilitators. They introduce the presentation, they introduce the presenter, they are participating in part of the storytelling, talking about clients and how they relate to those trends. But then we pause and we ask, how does this resonate with you? How do you relate to this? It's a very much so a value-driven discussion, because we want them to interact with the material, not just be a live webinar, right? So that's very deliberate. It's very intentional, to the extent where we always, you're never going to complete that whole conversation in an hour or 90 minutes. And so it naturally creates a conversation for follow-up around potentially how we can apply some of those insights into their business. Very, very intellectually driven, right? We're focusing on how to use the information. Another example is we do workshops. So this is a really common one that we'll not just see Topo use, but we'll also see, right, a lot of clients use, which is if your product solves some kind of very complex process, solves some kind of simplifies some kind of quality of life, but that story is hard to tell, then what a great way to do this is to talk through how a similar company has gone through it. So literally the whole presentation, we focus on walking through the use case story. And it's not so much doing a demo and saying, and then they click this and then they click that. It's more like telling the story about the solutions, the change management, the kinds of meetings, how much time it took, who was involved in the conversations, what were the conversations like, how did the business evolve as a result of that, and what happened, right? And then using visual tools to help describe that, and then again, pausing and asking for feedback. And the key is that the person that's sitting there receiving the information is interacting with the story, and they're using that, right, as a way to even say, who else needs to see this? So-and-so. So-and-so needs to see this. This is relevant to us. And they're now having a conversation about that. And it gives you a much easier way to say, would you like to see a demo? Would you like to have a conversation about how we can do that? It takes patience, it takes discipline, it takes the seller not smelling blood in the water and jumping on it. That requires them to focus more on making sure that you're having a conversation that they benefit from, and then using nuance and tact to ask at the right time to ask for the next meeting and recommend that. And that's way more of a professional effort. So those are two examples of that highly relevant first meeting that Topo offers, and that it works for our business model because we are a research and advisory firm. So it makes a little bit more sense that we have that kind of firepower. But that's something that a lot of other businesses can do. if they have the material. We have one customer, they publish a lot of great content, a lot of good content. And what they did was they just repackaged that content into a presentation around benchmarking for a specific vertical they were in, a mobile marketing attribution, super banal, right? Yeah. And it just gave the sales rep a lot more reasons to get great first meetings. Mm-hmm. That's what it came down to, right? And they were just talking through the benchmark data as more or less an aid, and then afterwards asking if they want to continue that conversation. So the highly relevant first meeting is all about discipline and value and understanding what the people in your market actually want to talk about.
Just to add to that, from the buyer's perspective, if you think about what they're going through, right? Would you rather be peppered with, what is your pain point today? What is the cost of that pain? Right? Would you rather be subject to an interrogation, which is what 90% of discovery calls feel like? Mm-hmm. Or would you rather hear a story of a company like yours, and you don't even really have to answer the questions because they can see it in your face, right? They can see it in your reactions. And because it's like, oh my God, that happened to us too. Or wait, really? Like, how did that work? If their reactions are unfiltered. And so as a buyer, it's a heck of a lot more fun and engaging. And as a seller, you get such better information. I mean, no comparison, right? You learn so much more than you would if you go through the, 10 discovery questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen similar success, Dan, at Outreach. Like, we have Sam Nelson, one of our awesome SDR leaders, as well as myself. We'll just go and do afternoon workshops or lunch and learns at companies that kind of, we're like, oh, that kind of fits our target accounts. And we're not going and we're not even talking outreach. We're talking sales engagement and what are best practices, because we are the experts, because we, see so many organizations interacting with it, and we'll build out their sequences. Like, hey, here is best practice. Based on everything that we know right now, these perform the best. And then you get people actually leaning in. They're like, oh, interesting. We didn't know anything about that. Maybe we should check out these guys, right? And we've got a question here that's super relevant, and I'll take a stab at it and let you both weigh in too. So George has a question, and it's, what if you are a very early startup that does not have use cases or client success stories? So if I was you, here's how I would tackle that. Is whatever problem that your service or product is solving, go and teach people how to solve that problem or service without your product or service. So go just teach people, this is how you would do it. Here's how you could solve it without buying anything, because you should know how to do that, because you probably hacked it together at one point and then built this product, service, whatever it is. And then at the end, you can be like, by the way, that was the problem I was trying to solve for so long, and here's how I ended up solving it with this. That's how I would do it if I didn't have anything to lean on as far as success stories go. Allie, I think this is pretty relevant to your world. I'm sure you ran up against this problem in the beginning. How did you tackle it?
In order to start something, right, you do an insane amount of research. Insane. I mean, I had done like 500 customer interviews before we had our first customer, right? Don't undervalue that data. That's still like super insightful. And then what I did is I just dove in and started to give that value away by, even like writing talk to so many people about sales decks, and then wrote the, Sales Hacker Guide to Sales Decks last year, right? That was from that research. Stick is not mentioned once. Stick wasn't even a product then, right? But I think those thinking about it as a long game, and what you need as an early stage startup is you need a small group of people who really care, and people care a heck of a lot more about the problems you're solving and the stories of, that you've heard from the field than they do about your feature set.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Allie won't tell you this, but that article she wrote, I believe, was like #1 on Sales Hacker last year. So go check it out. It's a really good one. So there you go. That's living proof of, what we're talking about, is how valuable the research that you went out and did was to other people. So yeah, I love it. And I knew we were going to run up against time. So we've got just under 20 minutes. So let's keep powering through here. I'll do one more play on this kind of highly relevant first meeting, and then we'll move on, just because it's been really successful for us at Outreach. Is we call it like the podcast play. So if you have any sort of podcast, or you do webinars or anything, and it's really difficult for you to break into a target account, you can actually invite them to on your podcast, on your webinars, and you get 30 minutes to kind of plan it out, and then you get an hour to actually go ahead and spend time with them. And as Dan said, you basically are doing a live discovery. It's basically a live discovery call, and it gives you a chance to build a real relationship with them. It adds value to them. It gives them visibility. It gives their brand visibility. Usually helps them with hiring if you have decent distribution. And it's just a really good way to kick off a relationship, and then you can hand it off to the appropriate party. So I wanted to sneak that one in there. But let's move on. Post-discovery, let's talk about some plays for kind of leveraging the insight that you get from those initial meetings to bring more people on board. And Dan, let's start with your thoughts on this one.
Yeah, so this one is especially important for the SDR, BDR, XDR, whatever you call them, DR relationship with the AE. And so this is one where if you're incentivized and you're comped this way, you can go out, and we call this the HighLow Fly. So this is about about leveraging the insights from that sort of initial engagement, and then coming up with a campaign, right, or a set of touch patterns, or a coordinated set of messaging around one major challenge that was identified in that process. So the example I shared earlier is, let's say you're trying to grow your EMEA expansion, right? Trying to grow EMEA, you expand in EMEA, right? Same thing. The point is, you have this one topic. And so now I'm going to divide and conquer. I'm going to identify 4 or 5 different personas within the business that are going to matter to that specific issue. And I'm going to design all my messaging around that one issue. Hey, I want to talk to more people about growing in Europe. Hey, I know you're focusing on this. I want to, talk to you about that. And that is a very coordinated way to leverage the insights to continue to go deeper and meet new people. That's example number 1. It's a high-low play. You're trying to meet more people inside of the business. This is very common in businesses that are hard to break into. So, example, if you sell MarTech, you sell manufacturing, both of those are great examples. In MarTech, right, we sometimes talk to the manager, demand gen marketer, et cetera, and then they'll tell us what's going on inside the business, and we can leverage that to go deeper. Versus in, say, manufacturing, you're talking to someone in supply chain, you're talking to someone in logistics, you're talking to someone on the production floor, and then they're going to be able to give you insights around what's going on at the exec level. Great examples. This is sort of feels like, yeah, duh, but it's not always so obvious that's the way, a great way to operate.
Quickly,
that's number
Dan,
1.
on that
the
point,
second,
just to make it super tactical, would you recommend letting them know that you got it from person X? Like, do you hey, I was talking to blah, blah, blah. She gave me this insight. Or do you come in as like the all seer who just happens to know this amazing information?
I'd say you talk to somebody on the team, right? You can say you talk to somebody. You don't have to name drop, right? That's where you can leverage tact there. Hey, do you mind if I use your name? Typically folks don't feel as comfortable with having somebody just name drop as they sell into a business. And so I tend to encourage our clients to reference that they spoke to somebody inside of the business, and even within a department. Hey, I spoke to a colleague of yours in the marketing department. Hey, I spoke to a colleague of yours in demand gen. And this is what they shared with me.
Cool.
Yeah.
The second is this is about leveraging your internal resources. This is something where you're taking that same idea of the highly relevant first meeting and you're repurposing it deeper into the sales process. So great example here is the executive workshop around that big use case story, right? Here's a big idea in change management that I want to introduce to you that a similar client has introduced. You're offering that. And so what the nuance here is that as a seller, you're talking to somebody, right? That's somebody that you're trying to build, maybe that you're trying to become your champion. And what you're offering them is, hey, look, here's a workshop that we can run that's highly valuable to your team that does not at all reflect us pitching our services. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to come in and walk through that same big picture story. Or if you didn't have to use that to get the first meeting, hey, we have this big change story. Do you think that your team would be interested in that? And what happens there is that way more people than you would have expected are going to get invited to those appointments. Sometimes you have subject matter experts internally that'll let you go do that. That's that sort of brave new world presentation or play. Another option is that same workshop idea, but more technical sometimes, right? So this is where you might leverage some of your solutions consultants or your solutions engineers, sales engineering resources to help have a much more technical appointment about how it is you're actually solving some of those big change management issues. A third example is that benchmark idea. Hey, look, you like me, I like you. We've got great data. Do you want to see how it compares to other companies like you? If so, let me know. I can collect the data points and we can set up a larger, more customized presentation. All three of those are about, again, the same idea, conveying a deeper amount of value to that individual team based off of what they need. Each market is going to be different in how you go about this. Big ERP companies have been doing this kind of stuff for years and years and years. And this is, but it's not as intuitive in some markets to do this kind of workshop. Another client, they offered content strategy resources, and they do a full-on content strategy recommendation report as part of the sales process before they even put a proposal in place, right? Yeah. So these are that post-discovery move is all about leveraging the insights, which requires sellers to actually listen and pay attention and build value, not just assume this is an opportunity, right? Rather, we need to invent the opportunity sometimes in these bigger accounts.
Yeah. Absolutely. And what I love about that too is, when you're putting these on, today, traditionally in SaaS, everyone knows they need multiple stakeholders. So be like, hey, who needs to sign off on this? Who else needs to be involved in this? And then you're putting the work on them. They're like, I don't really care. Like, this is a problem I want to do. And then this way, you're actually getting those people to come out of the woodwork on their own accord, right? Because they're showing interest in whatever workshop, brave new world thing that you kind of propose. They're coming out of the woodwork versus you having to go and find them, which is really cool. All right, moving on. Let's go to number 3. Ali, I'm going to definitely lean on you with this one. Yeah. And Dan, probably back to you just because of your notes. Yeah. Custom content. Yeah. Let's talk about this and how we can deliver it. When is it most effective? Let's talk through it.
Yep. So if you put yourself in your buyer's shoes again, or champion's shoes, what do they need to do? They have to evaluate solutions, and then they have to get their whole team on board, right? So they have to sell for you. So many companies miss the opportunity, and the battle is like, hey, can we pull in those people into the next meeting, trying to get them to come to you? The magic of customized content is that it's the Trojan horse that gets you in the door, right? It's you arming your champion to look really good in front of their boss. And it's really not that hard to do because a lot of people miss the opportunity, right? So the way I think about it is, every discovery call as a seller now, every discovery call like comes out with some insights, right? And the value I can add then in the next demo stage is pairing those insights unique to the company with patterns and trends I'm seeing from my research. That's one slide. You know, then the next part of the demo is like, all right, so we solved these 3 problems. Which one do you care about? Problem B, excellent. I'm gonna focus on, I'm gonna pull out my, you know, detailed slides on problem B now. And then I've got a 6-slide business case that the champion can take. It literally was subbing out some text, right? Taking a few notes and bullet points. And that is a bespoke business case that the champion presents, right? So you're basically framing up, you're giving them the deck that says, hey, should we use competitor A, B, or C? But you're competitor B, and you're the only one who built the materials for them. So you know who's going to win that? You are, right? Yeah. That's how I think about like the power of I mean, could go on a long time about custom content, but I think that's where it's most, it makes the biggest difference in the sales process, is that post demo, you know, getting your champion to sell for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And it kind of goes back to, like, again, the old school ways of, you know, back in the day when there was much more like RFPs going out, and I'm sure there still is in some industries, but remember when you could like get in front of the RFP and have some conversations before it, and then you kind of framed the whole RFP and it would come out and you'd be like, yes, they're using my language, like you got it all. You got it all, right? This is the same kind of thing, is when you're creating custom content that also includes, you know, your competitors, landscape, unique data, you get to frame what's important. They're using your language. If something is called something in your software service, whatever, they're going to get used to that language and expect it. So I think that was a great point, Ali. Jen, what else are you seeing that's working as far as custom content goes?
I've got a few points here. The overarching theme is that custom content answers 2 very simple questions, and it's clear and it's simple. It says what we learned and how we can help. Custom content answers both of those things in as simple as possible. It doesn't always mean more. It doesn't mean 45, 60-page decks. It means getting to the point, what we learned, how we can help. So custom content is a summary of every single interaction that you have throughout the sales process. And I know that sounds big, whatever. Let's get into the details. The first example is your follow-up emails and the way you follow up. Are you sending a follow-up email? What's the content you're following up? An example of not unhelpful is sending 5,000 links. I'm being dramatic. Sending 10 links, right?
Sending 5.
However, versus
sending 5 links. It's too much.
It's having a discipline of being able to figure out, here's what we learned, here's how we can help, and incrementally. So a follow-up email is a perfect example of a piece of custom content. Your presentation material, right, that you're using for the brave new world. You're not just dropping it in a template, you're editing it. You're also, if you need to, designing the custom content, custom presentations later in the sales process based off of who's actually showing up. You're putting in the effort to say, here's what we learned, here's how we can help. That extends out to the proposal and those materials as well. It's another example of this is the demo, custom demo storytelling, mapping out like a storyboard of here's what we're going to cover, here's the insight that we're going to use to share there, here's the story I'm going to tell, and here's how I'm going to relate it back to them. Putting in that level of effort on every single interaction, because remember, sales is just a bunch of meetings, right? So what we do in each meeting and how we get each meeting is the difference between a great process and a not so great experience for the buyer. So custom content is the summary of all those things. Ali already mentioned champion content. So I think that those are the major examples to share there. Yeah. I can tell you just from personally, one of my first sales stories ever doing this was, and I know we have 4 minutes left. I'm going to be quick. I was an inside sales rep, personally at an ed tech company. The client said, will you put together a list of all your features and benefits for me? And I was up all night putting this list of things together. 2 days later, I got back an RFP that had literally copy pasted every single thing that I had sent over into the RFP. Now, we're not talking about the ethics of that. What's cool about it was that I knew exactly how to answer and I knew who was winning that deal. But the humor in it is that it was such an exhaustive list that I created like an extra 4 or 5 hours of work for myself just by being exhausted. So that's a personal story when you brought up the RFP that meant that struck home.
Yeah, I love it. So yeah, so as we go to the last one, what I'm kind of hearing there is, and it goes back to the storytelling that Ali, we talked about at the beginning. It's like, it's based on the new insights that we have. What is the story that we want to tell now? And it's presenting that in an effective manner that allows them to go and tell that story internally. Mm-hmm. Okay, last but not least, close plays, extremely important. Dan, you want to tackle this one first?
Yeah. The first one, this isn't going to be news to anybody. It's having a true close plan. But the close plan is through the implementation. So that shows the major milestones, who needs to do what by when, showing the indication of I'm going to introduce our implementation, our delivery resources. And so right somewhere in the middle of that close and implementation plan is a close date, right? That's textbook. It's hard to do. If you don't have trust, it's an awkward conversation to facilitate, which is why you've got to do it. And if you've got the relationship from all those other meetings, it becomes a lot easier. That's the most practical as far as selling goes. After that, you've got these, how do I stay top of mind? Right? Like there are several ways to do it. One example in the more hilarious, but also helpful was we have one client, they sell to sales tech. Towards the end of the quarter, they send their clients pizza and bacon. And they'll literally just say, send them pizza and bacon at the end of the quarter and say, hey, hope you're having a great quarter, right? And that sales rep will be like, hey, did you get my pizza and bacon for your team? Obviously, the answer is yes, because no one's going to let either of those things just sit there quietly, right? And so that's an example. It's very, those types of little things. We've got other clients who will, right, said like there's other examples of similar types of engagements where you're staying top of mind, but in a thoughtful way, right? And that's the key.
I'm drawing out this summary right now, and I'm really glad to have the pizza and bacon anecdote because it's really going to add a lot to this.
Yeah, the bacon.
If you can share your screen, that would be amazing. We actually have someone being like, do you have any like template or something that can explain this strategy? So people love the visuals. And then last thing I'll add on top of Dan, it's basically just reiterating, but yeah, having like a mutual close plan from the get-go is so unbelievably important. Look at that. You just drew this right now?
Yeah. And
this is incredible.
I don't even have my Apple Pencil, so I've been using my finger.
Wow. Amazing.
So I got to do the bacon.
Here is your example of custom content. Imagine
custom content, baby.
If someone sent me this after a meeting, I would just say, send me the contract. Like, as long as it hit my pain points and like was actually relevant in business, like, this is incredible. Wow.
Ali, have you ever sent these notes after talks to people?
Yeah, people are asking for a JPEG. Can we send this out to people?
For sure. I will send that out. Oh yeah. This is how I take notes. Dan and I have the same visual note taking DNA there, and it has.
You might have got dethroned now, Dan. Though.
No.
Never. Short answer is yes. I will gladly serve in Ali's kingdom.
No way. No, it's been a great hack to get meetings, gets people's attention because they feel heard, you know.
Yeah, this is incredible. Like I could only imagine, like even this kind of custom content, and it goes through. It's like these buckets aren't, like we said earlier, aren't perfect buckets. Like you can use this type of stuff throughout the whole thing, right? Mm-hmm. And to get the highly relevant first meeting, I would react to this if I saw this in a cold email. You know, this, no better thing to do this post-discovery. Send this out to a few other people who you want to bring into the fold. Obviously, custom content and and close plays, you could actually do your mutual success action close plan, whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, absolutely.
There you go.
That takes us to our time. I wish we could have another hour because I love talking to you too, and you guys are a wealth of information.
Oh, we lost you, Scott.
Oh, am I back?
Yeah, you're back.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. We have a ton of great questions. I'm sorry we didn't get to them all. If people want to continue the conversation, best way to connect with you both?
Probably LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn.
Cool. LinkedIn, go follow these two, connect with them. And thank you all for hanging out. Thanks to Outreach, who sponsored this webinar, made it happen. Definitely a great place to coordinate all your account-based selling activities. And thanks again, Ali. Thanks again, Dan.
Thanks, guys.
Absolutely. Thank you.